Professor Scott, the first question I have for you is, everyone claims that internet shopping is completely going to change consumer behavior. What is your opinion on this?
Well, like most subjects in academia, it's more complicated than you might expect to start off. There is a revolution in shopping, but it might not be quite as total as one would expect when you use the word revolution. Many things have changed. Consumers have more options, and if you think about a channel of distribution as being a bundle of services, it's a way for consumers to get information. It's also a way for consumers to get the physical product itself. Then you can see that the internet has changed the economics quite considerably. Ways of delivering information from manufacturer to consumer obviously have been made less expensive and certainly easier for consumers. On the other hand, certain pieces of information are not available in an internet setting. Touch and feel, at least as recently as today, are not available on the web. Doesn't mean to say they might not be someday, but just not today. Similarly, on the web, we know that there are certain kinds of improvements in availability or access to product, so that consumers don't have to worry quite as much about goods being out of stock or being unable to see a broad variety of goods. On the other hand, you still have to wait 2 days, no matter what you do, just about to get the product that you were after. So we can see that consumers have really had a number of things opened up to them, and the economics of information and availability of product are different. And certainly we find that many consumers are taking advantage of these new options and ways of going about doing their consuming. But we know also that this is not everybody. Not everyone is on the web. Not everyone wants to be on the web, which may be surprising to some of us here at the Anderson School. And it turns out that consumers, as we have seen in many other cases where innovations have been developed and put out on the market, that behavior changes a little bit more slowly than we usually expect. So what we see now is a gradual settling down of those consumers who in the past have always used a lot of information, have always consulted consumer reports, have always talked to their friends and their neighbors, who have always read magazines and other publications, now have yet one more channel, and so they've become even more knowledgeable. People who have never collected very much information probably still are not collecting very much information. And then there's a group of people in the middle who, because of the ease and convenience of the net in terms of its provision of information and some of its ability to provide access to goods, have shifted. So I expect that what we will see over time is a bit more shift and a bit more towards the revolution side, but of course this is not always going to be a complete revolution.
Talking about a more specific issue, one of the big differences between the internet and conventional retailing has got to do not just with touch and feel, but also with the fact that about people-to-people interaction. So in conventional retailing, consumers actually interact with stores people and so on, whereas you don't have that on internet shopping. Is it possible to actually recreate that experience?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is exactly what one of my current research projects is about. This is a series of experiments that I've been running with Professor Amy Drolet here at the Anderson School and with Professor Meg Campbell at the University of Colorado Boulder. I think the original assumption was that the internet would be cold and impersonal, and that a successful retailing strategy would be precisely to recreate a more personal retail environment. And so you began to see this in two ways on the web. One is in terms of providing a face on the web, so that if you click on some websites, you will see a picture of a person, and the picture of the person might be up by the help button, so that it appears as if there is some nice, friendly, helpful person behind this website. Another form of kind of recreating the retail space is customization. And this is more the Amazonian kind of strategy, if you will, of providing recommendations based upon some observation of your behavior. So that when I log on to Amazon, they say, wow, Carol Scott, welcome back. Here's all the recommendations. And so maybe I feel that this is like going to my favorite salesperson and then making some recommendations. So we began to study this to see if, in fact, these were more helpful or less helpful, because there are some conflicting views about that. One view says that one of the reasons people are shopping on the internet is precisely because they don't like people. They want to go there because when they go into a retail environment and they ask for help, then they feel that the salesperson is perhaps trying to persuade them to some item that's not necessarily what they had in mind, or he's providing more pressure to buy when they're not quite ready, or they might feel indebted that they've used so much help from the salesperson and now they feel like they really have to buy. And so they're shopping on the net precisely because they don't have to deal with that. And so the question is, if that's true, then providing these efforts at personalization may be very counterproductive. There's another line of research which is equally fascinating, which suggests that consumers, no matter what you do, personalize objects. And so over time, as you begin to interact with the computer, you begin to treat it as if it were a person. And so you may find that consumers, even though you don't personalize the site, may begin to use the same sort of rules of engagement, so to speak, as you would if there was a person there. So Professor Jolie, Campbell, and I started a series of experiments to try to tease some of these things out. And we have done a variety of different kinds of experiments, some of them paper and pencil tests where we ask people to visualize various scenarios. And in a couple of the experiments, we even designed our own website and asked people to log on to the website and ask them to shop and then answer some questions for us and observe their behavior, of course. And what we're finding is that it's a little bit more complicated than the initial research notions would have suggested. In particular, it seems to matter quite a bit whether the person has asked for help or not. And if you're asking for help, then it appears fairly clear that you really want a person to show up. And in our experiments, this is fairly dramatic because the information is the same. The information can either pop up and be shown to you in a table form, or it can pop up and the person's face be there. So it's a very sort of innocuous kind of introduction of a person, and yet we find that having that person's face there makes a big difference in terms of their attitude towards the site, their satisfaction with their shopping experience, and also with their perceptions of the pressure and the manipulative intent, if you will, of the site. So if someone is asking for information, it seems pretty clear that it would be very useful to introduce some of these personal notions. And interestingly, we don't see any, on the net, we don't see any of the things you might see in a store of people feeling indebted because they've asked for help from that person or feeling that they have a loss of control. Unfortunately, marketers like to give people information. We hesitate to wait for somebody because, heaven forbid, there's something that they are going to miss if we just leave it to their own devices. And so what happens then if information just appears is quite an interesting story. And here it appears that there's really two kinds of people. They're the very experienced shoppers and they're the non-shoppers. And by this I mean people who like to shop a lot, they shop on the web, they shop in the retail environment, they just are shoppers. And then there are people who are not. And for people who are shoppers, if information appears unbidden or information is just offered, then in that case, it better not be a person. And in fact, their overall preferences are highest when the information appears, but it's not connected to anything personal. And that does play into this notion of people being on the net or being experienced on the net, wanting to be there to be able to do their shopping without a person. So the overall best is when the information just appears. You don't even have to click, you don't have to search for it, you don't have to go through 16 screens, information comes up. Unfortunately, the low experienced shoppers are not the same. And for those people, it seems to be, and we need to do some confirmatory studies, it seems to be the case that information that pops up is difficult to deal with. It appears to make it more difficult or confusing for them in this environment. And so for low experienced people, they tend to want a person there no matter what. So even if there are some feelings of loss of control, and even if there are some feelings of maybe pressure or attempts to persuade, for low experienced people, they would much prefer having that personal face. So we're beginning to see some differences here in terms of, the interaction style that that people prefer on the net, and then also which kinds of shoppers are which. Now, we did then look to the other kind of personalization, which I would call customization. So in one case, it's personifying the site through a face, and in the other, it's customizing it or making it more personal to you, tailoring it. And here, what we find is also an effective experience. The low experience people, well, let's go back. In general, customization is not very favorable. Most people prefer the non-customized site, which is an interesting observation given the prevalence of customization in the environment. For the low experienced people, though, what you see is if customization occurs, you can improve their attitudes toward it by putting a face on it. And so it's almost as if, once again, low experienced people are really depending upon that human characteristic, and that human characteristic can soften many of the tools that marketers use, particularly on the net, while for the high experienced people, that's clearly not the case.